Welcome to the table. And today we're excited because did you hear that little woo? How come you never woo?
I don't know.
We're going to
I
add
know,
that
I'm
in
just
Why
every
don't
time.
why don't you give me something to woo?
Oh,
We're running right out the gate, huh? As a senior pastor, when you look out into the room and you see someone asleep, does that just
man.
gut you? There was one Sunday morning in South Carolina, and there was a man who proposed to me during the message.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, who came to the side and got on a knee.
The Lord
And
told him.
he had a ring and was
Oh, no.
completely, and I was just like,
Was he attractive? I think sometimes in the church world, I know I do. I get so overwhelmed with the seriousness of
Sure.
every message and meeting and, decision. And before long, I look at my life, I'm like, who wants this? Welcome to the table. And today, we're excited because did you hear that little woo? How come you never woo?
I don't know.
We're going to
I
add
know,
that
just-
in
Why
every
don't
time.
why don't you give me something to woo?
Oh,
we're running right out the gate, huh?
yeah. That's how it's going to be today.
Yeah.
Can tell.
Sorry.
You have a little leftover Celsius happening.
Yeah, she's
Yeah. Did you?
I did
Oh gosh.
not.
So I have to tell you
did
right now,
not.
and if my wife starts yawning while you're talking,
oh gosh.
it's
here
not
we
that she's
go.
not interested. She's just you're boring her.
I
and
need
so
to get you another Celsius. I don't know if my ego can take a yawn while I'm
there's
talking.
so many times I'm sitting here talking, and she's like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Are you yawning at me right now?"
Oh
And
my
so,
gosh, that's
But if
gutting.
you wouldn't draw attention to it, they wouldn't know.
Of course
'cause
I'm
it's
gonna
not
draw
on
attention to
camera.
Okay,
it.
but also as a senior pastor, when you look out into the room and you see someone asleep, does that just
man.
gut you?
Not really. I'm like, oh, they're tired. They need a little rest. So good.
That's so
I'm
sweet.
glad I could supply
I
that
don't
for 'em.
mind the kind of sleeping. What I mind is this.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
people
that's almost
scrolling.
worse because it's not like they're too tired. It's like they just
Right.
chose.
You're just not in.
Yeah.
Okay, this is so good that we're talking about this because this is part of what I want to ask you. But what my absolute probably I don't know if I have a pet peeve. Like yesterday, we had a dude, and he might have had an agenda because what I was preaching. But people will walk down the aisle while I'm preaching and walk all the way across the front of the room, like looking for their seat over here,
You're kidding.
and I'm just like.
No,
Like-
and typically they have drinks in their
Yeah,
hands.
and that's the other part. I've literally had people walk in with like
Starbucks.
4 big gulps, and pass them down the row, and I'm like, "Are y'all that parched?
I love it.
Like, are y'all?"
They're like, we're gonna have
Are
our
y'all, like-
soda, our 40
One time, and occasionally,
ounce soda.
yeah, in our kind of expression of church, it gets a little lively sometimes. One time, I had a lady that she started amen, and she got a little bit too, she starts talking more and more and more and more. And there were some struggles going on there for sure. And
You're just like, all right.
and so literally at one point, my go-to line, which is probably not really good, but it's it's a little bit part of my personality. But my go-to line will always be in those moments like, "Thank you, I work alone," that kind of thing. And
You're like, thank you. This
Right.
is a solo, not
like,
a duet.
this is not. We're not doing a heckler thing today. This is not a comedian's act. And she just kept going, and she just got more intense, more intense, more intense. And and she starts saying, "I was a drug," and my heart was going out because like, "Oh, you poor
she's
lady."
testifying.
Oh yeah, and she gets after it. She's like, "I was a drug addict, I was a prostitute, and I was this, and I was that." And I literally said, "Well, you're being a distraction right now. So if you could go on out." And so then, of course, the security team takes her out, or the ushers, I guess, whatever they are, and they go outside, and they're trying to kind of like, "Ma'am." And boy, then she really goes off. Then she starts using some fancy words, and at that point, sentence enhancers. It was one of my favorites. So here's the question I want to ask you.
Okay.
You are traveling. Obviously, you're involved in a church, leading worship, leading teams, but then you travel. How much would you say you travel in a given year?
Man, I think it always looks different. It's like, especially this year, I got married in the beginning of the year. So we kind of took about 6 months off of traveling.
Oh, good for you.
Which was super different for me, just learning to be still. I love being able to be at my church and be planted. So that's a huge priority. So I'm not gone more than 2 weekends a month. But then there's also weekday trips with what I do because artistry, there's also songwriting and stuff,
Right,
which happens
right.
midweek and in Nashville all the time. So it kind of ebbs and flows. I don't ever know the numbers. I don't like to know too much of my schedule too far out
Sure,
because I'm
sure.
it'll be overwhelming if
Right,
you
you're like,
kind
"What
of
am I
look
doing?"
at everything. You're like,
Yeah.
man, am I gone that whole month? But just try to find little pockets of time. But I would definitely say it's probably more traveling than at home some seasons, especially
Right.
this fall, since I kind of
Right.
like pushed everything off at the beginning of the year. I was
Yeah,
like, oh, we'll
exactly.
do
Hey,
worship
well, I'm
night in
getting
the
married. We'll do it
fall.
later. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, we push
Now you got to pay
everything
for
to the
that.
fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so much fun. And I would say like now being married, it's all brand new. So it's like he gets to come with me a lot because what he does is remote. So we get to be a lot together. So
That's
it's like
awesome.
on the plane, things that have been like taxing before, it's like, oh, now it's fun. We're flying
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Put
Uh-huh.
my luggage up
I
there, man.
know. Oh
Come
my
on.
gosh, right? Traveling with a man. I'm like, all my assistants have always been
I'd have got married a
women.
lot earlier
Yeah.
if I'd have known
Yeah.
this. Like,
So I was like,
jeez.
oh my gosh, this is great.
That's
Man.
awesome. And your husband is an awesome guy. Just
He's
such a
so
sweet
sweet.
spirit.
He's so sweet.
And we wanted him to come here and hang out with us, but
Yeah.
he's working. Somebody's got to work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like, someone's got to, get the manna for the family. Like, all
So
right.
here's what I want to know. You've obviously had crazy experiences traveling to church. Tell us some of your craziest nightmarish, because I think everybody thinks like the traveling life is like, oh, it's got to be so glorious. And
Oh,
I'm sure they're great moments,
So many great moments.
You know?
So many
but then there's some of you like make you
crazy
think,
moments.
why am I doing
You
this?
guys, I'm trying to think of what I can tell because
I want
there are
names
stories.
and
Yeah,
churches.
there's
No, no,
stories
no.
that would
We will
literally
change
have us be
names
rolling right now.
and change
But
locations.
when you were talking about that, like heckler in the crowd, there was one Sunday morning in South Carolina, and there was a man who proposed to me during the message.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, who like came to the side and like got on a knee.
The Lord
And
told
like
him.
he had a ring and was like
Oh, no.
completely, and I was just like,
Was he
this is-
attractive?
to someone.
Yeah.
Nice
So
save.
kind.
Good
you know,
save.
there's someone for
So
everyone.
kind.
And then I
He was
like,
ugly. That's what she's saying.
I was just like, oh my gosh. And he like has a full speech prepared. The whole team is like getting up. The security doesn't notice for the longest.
Hey, right,
And I'm
right.
like,
Oh,
you guys.
no.
But that was definitely one of those moments. He came back a couple weeks later because this was at a church I was on staff with in South Carolina.
Wow.
And he
so
was
he knew you.
Oh, this was premeditated. He
Oh,
was like,
wow.
I'm
This wasn't
ready.
like a random
Wow.
guy.
And what was funny was, I guess he was on our volunteer team. He was like on cams. And one of the cameras that morning was like on the ground, like the one that normally is like by us. We're like, that's weird. And then he comes and like sits
Brother
by
had a
me,
plan.
and I'm like, oh, he like woke up this morning and was like, this is it. Came back a couple weeks later. He was like, really, I think he punched a cop. I think he went to jail.
So it's a good
But I was
thing you
like,
didn't marry that guy.
Yeah.
That's what
I
I'm
don't
saying.
think he was the one for me necessarily, but no, we've had so many just crazy instances, and then
But
like,
that was like at your home. I mean, that was like at your home church.
Oh,
That really is crazy.
for sure. I
Like-
feel like when people are like, "What are the odds?" Like, I'm the odds. Like, it's like, what are the odds that would
Like,
happen?
that's
It's
me.
normally, and it's with great things too, but also just with the craziest things.
Wow.
I like recently, just like a crazy situation. Remember when all the planes like got grounded?
Yeah, yeah.
We were flying. My whole team, there's 8 of us. We were flying to Iowa that day.
Mhm.
And it was just like the craziest travel day. Things are getting canceled. Enoch ended up, he can he can sing.
Right,
He
right,
never sings with me. I'm like, oh, so you're singing with me tonight.
right.
And then we just like threw some other people on the plane. Anyway, we get there. There was like, it was one of those trips. It's like, this is like a sketch. Like everything that just
Right.
kept happening, and then there was no flights out. Like Armani, who was my MD, who was here with us last
Yeah.
night, he lives in Baltimore, Maryland.
Right.
He had to get a rental car and drive from Iowa.
To
Iowa.
Iowa.
It was like
That's not an
that or
easy
be in
deal.
Iowa for a couple days.
Right,
and I was
right.
like, love Iowa.
Not that much.
I was like, oh, we couldn't have gotten like stranded in San Diego.
Right,
Right.
It was
exactly.
like
If you're gonna do
one of
it,
those kind of moments.
if you're gonna do it, for
Oh,
sure.
no, but yeah, I mean, I've had people, then there's also like weird things of like witches will come. I had some
Yeah.
girl doing like incantations over my mic one time. I was like, excuse me.
I'm gonna
I'll
need a different
take
mic, please.
that. Yeah, I was like, let's anoint this with oil.
Yeah.
So I mean, we've experienced it all, but it's fun.
That's quite the. And I'm sure that's probably you never know what you're walking into, because I always think about like even like last night, which was awesome by the
Yeah,
way, and I think it
yes.
was just such a powerful night of worship. But you're walking into teams that you don't know,
Oh, for
churches you
sure.
don't know, people you don't know.
Totally.
Are you kind of wired more extroverted people wise, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's more pastoral than extroverted. I think
Yeah.
like the older I've gotten, it's like less of I like love just chatting with everyone. I
Right.
love getting to know people.
Yeah.
But even like what you're saying, I was at an event a couple weeks ago and I'm like, no matter what, where I get to be, I know that like the grace on my life to be
Sure.
able to like speak into people. So I'm like, heard some of the team members like kind of talking some trash. I was like, hey guys, just want
Yeah.
to take this time to call you guys higher.
That's
And they're
awesome.
just literally like, you don't even work
Wait.
here. And I understand that. But
That's why this is really important. I don't work here.
yeah, and
And
it's like I just get the honor of like even last night when you like feel like home. Like it
yeah.
really is getting to, and that's something we love to do is
Yeah.
not bring our whole team
Yeah.
and to be able to integrate with different worship teams and
Yeah.
just get to know stories and like get to know the stories on y'all's team last night. That stuff to me is way more exciting than us
Yeah.
putting on a concert.
I'm seeing a lot of that because it the era, it seems, of like the large traveling band, just even
Sure.
logistically how
Sure.
hard that is and expensive and all that.
Totally.
But like, I mean, we've had a few worship leaders, worship artists, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's a number of titles you can give them, but just worshipers, leaders that come in and they say, no, I'll just work with your team.
Yeah.
And some of them are like, man, we had Martin Smith a number of months ago. And I'm like, man, for these guys to be able to
Sure.
connect with somebody with this kind of history and this
Mhm.
kind of experience is
The
so
sad
powerful.
thing was, though, so many of our
Yeah.
team are so young
12.
that they're like, "Who's Martin Smith?"
Yeah, they had no idea who he was.
And
Oh,
I'm
that's
like,
so tough.
"Oh,
They're like, oh, you
honey."
brought your grandpa friend to play with us. That's awesome.
You're like, you have
You know?
no idea. He's
And I'm
paved
sitting
the
here just
way."
like I flipping grew up in like ministry with Delirious and Martin Smith and
Oh my gosh,
all that
Delirious was the
stuff.
first of its kind.
Oh yeah, and I was trying to convey to them like in many regards, I would say but a lot of what we have today was sort of birthed out of that
That era.
origin,
Yeah.
Oh my
from
God.
Hillsong to the Planet Shakers to all of these guys. Like
Totally.
these guys were so instrumental, and then the way they did it was so amazing and that sort of thing. So, but I also love the fact that you are, connected in a local church, which is another huge part for us because I think we've seen so many, not necessarily us, but as a whole, these traveling, out 200 nights a year, and like their families are a wreck, their lives are a wreck, they're addicted to drugs because they're not everybody, but because there's this disconnection from the community. And so talk about that. I want to know, like, how does that work for you? 2 weeks a month, you're there,
I mean, it's like what you're saying. I feel like we had like an epidemic of like orphan evangelists.
Yeah,
And if you even just look at scripture, it's like, where are you pulling your strength from?
yeah,
Mhm.
Because you're like a potted plant with no root system.
right,
Mhm.
right,
And what we do has become kind of fascinatingly like glamorous to the
Yeah.
public eye
yeah,
when it's not. I'm not here to say like my life is so hard and what I do is so hard.
yeah,
But it's what we do is like if you deduce the worship leader, we're Levites. We're on the front
Right,
lines. We're on
right.
the front lines of warfare. We're on
Sure.
the front lines of like we get the flack for a
Yeah,
lot
that's
that's
so
going
good.
on. And to not to understand the spiritual weight of it and to think that it's like green rooms and like airport pickups and
Right,
first
right.
class is like that's not what it is.
Right, right.
And so with that being, I think it became more glamorous. So you just saw a lot of people get into it.
Yeah,
And without a covering, you're just kind of like free flying. And I used to think when I was younger, like accountability was like control.
sure.
And I've definitely been under some more insecure leaders before where it's like, you need to just be here, only be here.
Right.
And I think in my youth, I didn't understand that that was actually probably what was needed for me.
Yeah, right.
Like
right.
if
This season.
yeah, it was totally this season of me serving someone else's vision
Yeah.
and just like learning how to be, I don't know, more humble and just like honing in my craft. I
Right.
remember like even the story of David, like when he was anointed versus when he was appointed, a
Right.
very long time.
Right.
But we
right.
think it's like straight from the field right
Absolutely.
into the palace. So I think that that was definitely a season for me. And then just realizing that now, like, I have a covering that is a safety net
Yeah.
of like, I have people that know my whereabouts that get to pour into me.
Yeah.
And I have people that can tell me no,
Yeah.
that like I submit everything to my
That's so
pastors.
good.
And I think if you have a wounded point of view,
Yeah.
you'll hear that sentence and it's like, that's controlling.
Right. Right.
And it's
That's
like
manipulation,
that's out of
control.
order.
Right.
And it's like, no, it's way more of learning safety. And I'm so privileged to be under some incredibly secure leaders
Yeah.
that there's never been this tension of like, why aren't you here?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's more of, okay, is that going to fill you up? Is this a
Yeah.
season? Is this a church that's going to be life-giving to you
Right.
in the season that you're in? Or like now you just got married, is this time to be out, or what is this going to
So
look
good.
like?
So important.
And so I think with that, and you just pull so much, like being a part of a root system, it even like when you look at trees, it's like you get so much more strength and nutrients. And even when like you feel like parts of you are like fading away or dying,
Yeah.
there's so many nutrients that can get to you because you're connected to people.
So good.
And it's great to just, I mean, and even what you're saying, like when you are the judge, jury, and executioner of your own life, that you
Yeah.
get to choose everything, that's the
Yeah.
scariest place to
It
be.
is. It is, in fact.
And it's like that's where that happens of like addiction and coping and those things of if I in an unhealthier season, I would have seen like the success of man as like godly success.
Right.
Of like we look at like
Right.
numbers or streams or how many records you're selling or how many times you're out on the road.
Right.
Like this is success. But then at home, you have no peace. You have
Right.
disunity in your family. Like
Exactly.
our lives are supposed to bear fruit. They're not supposed to be like lavish.
Yeah.
And I think
So
that that
good.
comes in accordance, like when you ask the Lord for wisdom and he's like, oh, Solomon, like, here you go. Like,
Yeah.
here's the
Yeah.
keys to everything.
Yeah.
So I think that that's like just learning and like growing up of
Yeah. So
realizing
good.
that it is some like recalibration of your mind. Because I think all of us, especially artists,
For
you
sure.
have this like ambitious monster
For
inside
sure.
of you
Yeah.
that you have to starve.
Right.
Like
Right.
you have to keep killing it because the reality is we're not artists in a mainstream industry.
Yeah.
Like we still are worship leaders.
Yeah.
And that disconnect of not being at a church, I've seen that's where we create celebrity.
Right.
When you stop praying for people, when you
Yeah.
stop
When you
serving,
stop touching people, yeah,
yeah,
like
when
you
you're not
kind of.
touchable anymore, that's where this it creates this like stage. It's this us and them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that I love. Like at my church, I'm not like the artist.
Right. Right.
Like
You're
it's not that.
celebrated there for just who
Yeah.
you are
And just being
as a
able to
person.
be poured into
So
and
good.
like we always say at our church, like we don't build a church, we're building people.
Yeah.
Like that's what we're doing.
Exactly
And
it.
so, and I got to feel that. Like I
Love
remember I
that.
came off a long week, and just some crazy things that happened, just like industry. This industry is pretty intense sometimes.
Yeah. For sure.
And like I came off the plane and went straight over to our pastor's house. We sat on their couch and they're like, we don't think you should lead worship in the morning.
Mm.
And they're like, you just take a time to like sit down and receive, still come. We still want you to be in prayer partner and do all those things. Like, but maybe let's not.
Yeah.
And it was so different for me
Yeah.
to experience that
Yeah.
because I think I was always like, well, this is your agreement.
Right.
And
Right.
it's like, if you're only going to be
You've
here
got to
this minute,
perform.
yeah. And it's like, no, it's beyond caring for people. And even pastors who have creatives on their teams, like
For
I would
sure.
say the more you pour into who they are as people, it's almost like the more you try to like keep someone on a leash, the more they're just going to want to break off of it.
Exactly.
But even now, like I don't ever think of like, oh, I need to be here this many times a month. I'm just like, I want to be here as much as I
Right.
possibly
Right.
can.
You're home.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're at
So
home.
it just changed the whole perspective.
I love that. I love that.
So, how do you build your team for when you're gone?
It's a great question. I'm so fortunate to work with a lot of great leaders. And I remember when I came on staff at my church, my pastor was like, are you going to be okay not to be like the leader
The
of
leader.
everything? And I was like, my
Like,
response was like, I will always follow someone who's leading. But if no
yeah.
one's leading, I'm
Right.
gonna, like,
Exactly.
that's where I'm going to
We're not going to
probably
wander around.
step up. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
But no, it's so great the way that we've built our team. It's not on one person. And
Mhm.
so that just makes me feel so released to go. There have been moments, and then there's things like we'll throw something on the calendar, and I'm like, oh, I need to be here for this.
Right.
And then we'll just move stuff around. And that's where it's just kind of like where it's always been priority. But I would never want to be gone for an extended period of time where like people forget, or
Right.
even like when I'm home, just try to make the most of like even just locking eyes with our team
Just
or
connecting.
like
Yeah.
going to coffees and doing things like that and just creating. When I first came on staff, I also didn't travel for about 6 to 8 months because I was like, I want you
Right.
guys to have relational equity with me. That's not like, my character when I'm gone.
Yeah.
So where it's not like, where is she? What has
Right.
she got
Here comes
going on?
yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. But so it's been really special. And we just don't have the culture of like, well, where's Anna? Like that
Right.
wouldn't be
Right.
like it wouldn't be tolerated.
Right.
It's more like, okay, Anna's here tonight. Let's all be praying. Like so many times, even in our group chats, they'll be like, we know Anna's doing worship night here. Let's all gather together to pray.
That's
And
awesome.
I'm like, that's just like so special.
Yeah.
And it's not always common. So I'm really grateful for where I get to
Right.
be for
So you get
sure.
support and, it staves off, I would assume, the loneliness
Oh,
especially before you
totally.
were
To-
married.
oh my gosh,
That
yeah.
was your system.
Totally. And it's like, I think that's something huge too of like what you're saying is like leadership doesn't need to be as lonely as we've made it out to
Yeah,
be.
true.
I used to think that I had to be completely separated from everybody.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm so
like,
sorry.
yeah, I'm like, and I think it's just growing up in like a mindset
Well,
of,
we were actually taught that.
Yeah,
yeah,
we were.
Like literally in our
Our
generation,
senior pastor
our senior
told us.
pastor said, "You can't have friends in the church."
oh,
As a youth pastor, as a 20-year-old, like,
totally.
and I'm like
Because you're
going,
like, they can't know
okay,
that you're human too.
right,
Right.
Like
right.
you have to lead these
Right.
people.
He literally
Right.
would, and I love him, godly man,
Mhm.
responsible for bringing us into ministry,
Totally.
legit, integrous. Like, I mean, just I can't. There's nothing negative I could say about him. And at the same time, I'm like, the man used to mow his lawn in dress
Dress
slacks and a
slacks.
pair of dress shoes because he's
Man,
afraid
yeah.
somebody would drive by and see him, like even in a. And I'm like, listen, that's
You're
why
like, that's not our story.
I'm like, I'm moving to Arizona and we're not mowing anything ever. So if that's going to be
You're
the
like, this
deal,
isn't going to be me, okay?
and I would just, but that was the way it was. That was the way we were taught,
It was
and
an
then
inherited way of thinking.
and it just sort of carried on generationally, and then all of a sudden people were like, wait, we're watching too many people just implode in this process.
Sure.
And so we've got to find a better way.
Yeah.
You can't grow healthy on your own.
No.
You absolutely
Yeah,
cannot.
that's true.
And that is just the recipe for failure. It sets your people up
Yeah.
to feel like, well, I can't live like that. So I'll just walk away, give
Totally.
up and walk
Totally.
away. Like people need to see reality. They
Totally.
need to see you fall down and get back
Yeah,
up and
for
keep
sure.
going
You're a
and draw
person.
from each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
And they need to see biblical community lived out
Man.
if they're going to
So key.
be successful in life.
So
Yeah.
good.
I think that as you're talking about like church histories and all this, obviously, through some of your sharing last night,
Yeah.
um, inside of that story and the song Manasseh, we shared it, we talked with you last night about it, but I was familiar with that song long before I was familiar with you because my wife would play that song all the time in terms of forgiveness. There's a lot of talk about church hurt.
Yeah.
And you've grown up in church.
Totally.
And so tell us about that. Cause I grew up in church as
Yeah.
well. And I watch what's happening in all of the deconstruction and the church hurt and that sort of thing. So tell us about that story. How did you, cause there's a lot of things that I listen to you, Anna, and I'm like, I want to know where you learned that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because there's certain things you're saying that obviously are probably caught,
Sure.
imparted to you. There's certainly a grace and a wisdom that God's given you.
Mm.
But I look at it and go like that whole, starving your own ambition.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's so difficult for creatives and especially in a
Totally.
world that's so filled with social media and success
Yeah.
everywhere
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like, oh, I gotta start putting my music out there.
Yeah.
And maybe. So
Sure.
tell us about your sort of story coming into
Man.
growing up in church and ministry.
Yeah, I've been in church my whole life. I was like raised by two worship leaders. My dad was also a chiropractor, but and a classical guitarist. My mom was a jazz singer. So I'm the youngest of four, and we were all super musical. So doing music in the church was just kind of, I think I did my first solo when I was like 3 years old. Like that was just kind of our whole lives. And we did a lot of missions work too. And my dad had gotten his own chiropractic company. We grew up pretty poor, I would say. My dad was just in school and there's four of us. So it was kind of, it was what it was. And then, but he started his own chiropractic company. So then we started seeing like more than we'd ever seen before. My parents were really intentional about like, hey, we want you to see that this is not the way of life that everybody gets. So we would start going to Kosovo every summer over my birthday.
That's awesome.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to me.
Now that would be extravagant,
No,
like
yeah.
like bucket list stuff today. But in
Yeah,
those days, I'm
no,
sure it was work.
we were in the middle of a war with the Serbian
Yeah,
people,
come
so
on.
it was pretty intense. I was 6 years old the first time I went.
Wow.
And I remember when we went, we were building houses for orphans and widows. And so the houses were pretty small.
Yeah.
And because they didn't tear down the ruins of the old homes, so we'd have a small piece of property left to build like a small home for
Mhm.
the moms and daughters because they pretty much wiped out all the men and their
Wow.
sons. And this one story in particular was just really, really, really tough. And the house was really small. So my mom and my sister were the only ones that really got to like tour it. And we were like outside. I'm like 6 years old having Turkish coffee in a courtyard with all these people. I'm like, anyway.
What a life.
I'm like, that's why I don't do caffeine anymore. I think it's broken
You
me.
probably
Um,
had a little too much.
Yeah, but so my mom came back outside and she like gathered our family and she was like, there was nothing on the walls of this home, but there was one picture of Britney Spears and she was like a poster. And she was like, what would you guys do if you had that kind of impact in the world? And so
Mm.
that was kind of like a shift. Actually, all four of my siblings, we went into the entertainment industry, the mainstream
Wow.
entertainment industry. And so it was like, it looked like Disney Channel and all those things. Like that was my youth,
Right.
was part-time living in Burbank, California,
Mm.
where all the studios for Disney were, and then part-time living in St. Louis, Missouri,
Wow.
where we were a part of like a church that had a prayer room. So I was homeschooled because I couldn't manage going to a school during these
Right.
times.
Right.
So I would do like internships at our
Wow.
church and in the house of prayer. So like Tuesdays looked like 12 hours just praying and
Mm.
leading worship sets since I was super young. So I had this juxtaposition of like two lives. Like I grew up thinking it was like, I'm Hannah Montana. It's like so stupid. But it really was this really interesting, like we're in like mainstream entertainment industry to be like a light in the world, but it was like so intense and so dark and very heavy.
Right.
And
Right.
then like home, I'm like leading worship and like I think I was like teaching a Bible study on the book of Revelation when I was 14. I was like a
Wow.
weird kid. Okay. I was really into it all.
You
Uh-huh.
were down.
But I think that so much of that poured into why like that talk of like ambition, because I saw it like at a young age and I
Sure.
saw it in
Sure.
like the most toxic way.
Yeah.
And then when I was about 16, I remember I was at a party in LA with my brother. We were like a duo at this time. We were on like the verge of moving full time to Los Angeles and signing this really big deal. And I was sitting in this house and seeing things happen, and like Holy Spirit inside of me, like more than I've ever felt him, was like, get out. And I ran
Mm.
out to the house and I ran out into the front yard. My brother followed me. He's like, what are you doing? You look crazy. And I was like, if we're not going to be aligned in the way that we're going to be in this, I can't do it. And I
Mm.
look back at myself and I was like, I was so young to think that way. And I'm
Right.
so grateful that the Lord was so
Right.
real to me
Right.
that I'm like, I think now, like, it's almost harder, like if you had a huge opportunity and you're just like weighing all the options and you're
Right.
like, okay, Lord, like I must be in this. But I remember going back to my hotel room with my mom was there and like calling my dad and being like, I don't want to like gain the world, lose my soul. I don't want to do this anymore.
Mm.
I want to go back home. So we went home and then I just kept serving in our house of prayer, still kept making music. I never released any more of the like secular music or anything. And then from there, when I chose to like be a worship leader, it was like worship leading wasn't an industry. It was like
Right.
I chose to be like poor.
Right.
I was like,
Right.
this was like, I'm
Right.
going from like
I am going to
entertainment industry.
ministry.
I'm going into
Yes.
ministry. I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
have a full-time job.
This is just like Kosovo.
Yeah. And then
Yes.
I'm like, I'm gonna be serving at our church.
Right.
This wasn't like this massive thing
Right.
that you would just like, now I'm gonna release music in this. That didn't exist. Like our church made songs that we like gave away for free
Right.
to like our congregation because it was like what we would sing.
Right.
And so from there, my parents had moved us to another church in St. Louis, and I was just serving on their worship team. And I went from like fully like a house of prayer, we speak in tongues on Sundays, like it
Mhm.
was super free flowing, sitting down at a piano for 2 hours, just like singing from the Spirit, to a church that was like super seeker sensitive.
Yeah.
It was like very organized. We had multiple campuses, tons of services. It was a mega church.
Right.
And so I experienced this like juxtaposition of that, of like, first I was like a brat. I was like, Holy Spirit can't move here. And
Right.
I
Right.
had this huge encounter with the Lord. He was just like, you're putting me in a box to think that I can't move in 22 minutes, but you're
Mm.
telling everybody that they're putting me in a box.
Right.
And I was like, oh man. And that's where I really learned like the structure of like worship and church
Wow.
staff and things. And they asked me to be they're like, we've never had an intern, but we're gonna like pay you. I was like 16. I was like, okay. And literally since I
Wow.
was 16, I've been in full-time ministry.
Wow.
I've had the privilege to work at a lot of different churches. Um, when I was 18, a good friend of mine, her dad, was named Israel Houghton. He was a
Mhm.
worship leader
Yeah.
and amazing. And he had a conference and he was like, I know you wrote this song and it's a worship song. And Mariah showed it to me and I want you to do it at our conference. And I was like, it's not even done. I was like, I'm not
Right.
doing that. I'm not singing this song. He was like, he was like, no, you're gonna do it. Anyway, I sing the song, and then from there, it kind of like went all over. I mean, we
Right.
sang it at a conference of worship leaders,
Right.
and it was like Lakewood Church was singing it on a Sunday, and
Wow.
like all these different churches, and Israel's like, you got to release this song.
Mm.
And I had this moment with the Lord. I was like, I do not want to be in the industry at all.
Right.
I've given that up. It was honestly like kind of like triggering for me.
Yeah.
And the Lord was like, you be faithful to do it, and I'm gonna put it where it needs to go.
Yeah.
So there's no more strategic conversations or opportunists. Like I was like a kid learning how to work a room. Like that's what you
Wow.
had to be as like
Sure.
a child. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was like, I want to be out of that. Release that song. It like charted for weeks. We didn't release it with anybody. We didn't release it with the labels. Independent. It
Right.
was just crazy what the Lord did with it.
Wow.
And I would literally say like every opportunity I've had from there, I'm a hard worker and I do a lot, but every opportunity's been the Lord,
Yeah.
like being so gracious. But I got to work on a lot of church staffs and like working with people over a certain amount of time. It just happens.
Sure.
Like pain happens,
Yeah.
ministry pain happens. And I mean, you could Google places I've been at before, and it's like, oh God.
Yeah.
And just things like that. And I realized in the fall of 2020, I was just kind of like looking at my hands, and it was just this moment of like, Lord, I've always loved your church. I've built my life around your church.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's hurt me in
Yeah.
a way that like I don't want to feel this way anymore.
Right.
I don't want to feel this like I don't know, this tension between your bride. I know you still love your bride,
Yeah.
but I need to again.
Right. Yeah.
And it was really this journey of like healing. I went to a lot of counseling,
Sure.
which I'm like such a believer in.
Yeah. For
I
sure.
went to a Christian counselor, which
For
is
sure.
huge because
For
if you
sure.
go to a counselor
Yeah.
that's not saved, they're never going to understand
You're
why
not in
you
the same
forgive
place. Yeah.
unconditionally, why you would go back and treat people, why you would lay your life down.
Yeah.
That's just not culture.
Yeah. It's just not the
So it
same.
was just like being able to be there. I went through this pastoral healing too, which was just beautiful. And then out of that, there's some really good friends of mine. They're Jimmy and Irene Rollins, they're pastors. And they're like, there's this church in Dallas that we want you to go to, and we just see that you should be there.
Mm.
Because I had like come out of this season of like, okay, going through healing, still being in ministry. But I knew that I didn't have scars yet. It was pretty much like
Right.
scabs.
Right.
So the wrong environment, it could just go
Right.
way
Right.
back.
Right.
And I remember I sat down with my pastors now, Earl and Onika, and there was a lot of churches. It's like a funny thing to say. There's a lot of churches that were offering me jobs
Sure.
and things like that. It
Absolutely.
was,
Absolutely.
and I sat down with some pastors who were like, I'm not going to pay for the sins of your former pastors. I was like, okay.
Right.
I was like,
Right.
okay, got it.
Right.
And so, and I sat down with Earl and Onika, and I remember he was like, hey, is there anything that I could say that
Wow.
would trigger you to represent your like seasons that you've been in before? Because I'd like to like love you well through this.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, man, like this could really be a place of healing.
Yeah.
He spoke a message that Sunday that I was there, and he was like, he had boxing gloves and a suitcase, and he was holding, he's like, this is how I see so many of us in church. Like, we're ready to fight because we're so offended. And we
Mm.
have our suitcase because we won't be unpacked, and talks about like foster children. Even after they get adopted, they
Right.
won't take their
Right.
suitcase out of their room
Right.
because they're so used to having
So
to get
used
up
to
and
that.
go.
Yeah.
And he was like, what if you just unpacked? And I just remember the Lord speaking to me in that moment, like, this is where you're supposed to be.
Wow.
There was no like, this wasn't an interview. This was not even a thing. It was literally like, oh man, I know I'm supposed to be here. And that next morning, Earl was like, so we are going to offer you a job. He was like, do you think you should be here?
That's awesome.
And my dad came to visit like 6 months after me being there. He was walking the halls, and he referenced the story of Joseph. And like, you know, the story of Joseph.
Yeah.
It's like, he had to forgive at every
Yeah.
corner and every turn. And like, he was truly justified to be bitter.
Mm-hmm.
It's like those moments where like, yes, something wrong has happened to you.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to disqualify anything that someone experienced in church, because some of it is so
For
wrong.
sure. Yeah. For
Like
sure.
it shouldn't have happened.
Right.
But we see, obviously, it's a prerequisite to Jesus coming in the later scripture.
Yeah.
But he just forgives in the face of pain.
Yeah.
And not only does he forgive, he blessed the hands that hurt him. And the Lord gives him 2 sons, the first one being Manasseh, which means to forget the suffering of my
Right.
father's
Right.
house. And when my dad walked the halls of the church, he just like had tears in his eyes. He's like, Anna,
Mm.
this is your Manasseh.
Wow.
Like, you don't have to carry it anymore.
Right.
And I literally just like sobbed, of course. I was like, how did you even think of that? And it truly has been like
Yeah.
serving under healthy leadership
So good.
and being in an environment that's definitely not perfect. Not here to say that we don't have the same problems that every
Yeah.
other church can
Yeah.
experience. But it's not a perfect church. It's a healthy church. And I think that now I'm not to be like, oh, our church is so much better.
Sure.
It's like, it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible
It
to
is
be a part
possible.
of a healthy ministry. and just to pivot when you realize things are going wrong.
Yeah.
And like I love our pastor. He'll like turn on himself and be like, I shouldn't have done that. Let's keep going. And it's like that to me was just so different. I
Yeah.
was raised under the kind of leaders you're talking about, like
Right.
who were
No
always
matter what he
dressed up
says. Yeah.
and hair was perfect and
Yeah.
everything. And there was
Yeah.
no like turning back on that. So there was so many things that I feel like the Lord just was able to heal. I thought I was going to carry certain like limps for the
Right.
rest of my
For your
life
life. Yeah.
for what I'd been through.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, the Lord's so much greater than that to actually take away the sting. And like traumas and triggers are like a huge thing we talk about right
Sure.
now.
Right.
And I think it's so great to do like trauma mapping, all those things in counseling. But we still do serve a God that
Right.
heals,
Right.
that can actually take those things
Yeah.
away, that we don't have to dance around landmines, that they can actually be like rewritten
Right.
because he's so much bigger than all of
Totally.
that. So
Absolutely.
I think that that's definitely been a season that I've been able to like go into, and that's where that song came from.
Yeah.
Of like, man, I'm so grateful, and it's been amazing to hear people's stories. And even like you were kind of mentioning last night, I remember the first day I released that song, and I was like, oh, I'm like, I don't even know if it's good.
I'm sure that's got to be such a difficult
Oh my
process at
gosh, you're like,
times.
I don't even know if this is gonna be good,
Like,
and this is the
'cause
most
it's so much a
vulnerable
part of
thing I've
you,
ever
right?
written,
Yeah.
and you just
Yeah.
like give it to people for
Please
people
love
to
me.
be like, all right.
Yeah.
And I just had like an influx of like church leaders
Yeah.
and pastors' kids who were like, I remember one message in particular. It was like the night it was released. She was like, I served on staff at my dad's church my whole life. She's
Mm.
like, we've been out of ministry for 10 years. We can't even walk in the doors of a church.
Wow.
And she was like, I didn't know what prayer to pray. She's like, I didn't know what
Yeah.
was the next step for
Yeah.
me.
For sure.
And she was
Just
like, this
stuck.
has given me a
Yeah.
prayer to experience this, to be
Yeah.
able to get back into it. And I was like, man,
That's so
just that
good.
it's been so powerful to see that like the Lord really is used the things that I thought he could never use.
Yeah.
Of like the hardest things I've had to walk through.
Yeah.
And now just seeing how he's traded like true traumas for like tool belts. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, now I got these tools on my belt and I get to walk people through like, I mean, we're in Dallas.
Yeah.
And Dallas has experienced a lot of ministry pain recently.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And just with leaders.
For sure.
And so I feel honored that I get to sit across from women and girls and be like, okay, I know what you've walked through. I've experienced a lot of these same things, and there's another side to it
Yeah.
that we don't have to stay in it. So it's definitely been like an honor that I get to do
That's
this with
awesome.
people.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, first of all, I think this, like, thank you for stewarding even this pain
Man.
to a place of still coming around to God's, redemptive purpose and all
Yeah.
of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
people who give up in the middle of this, like, forget it. I'm
Totally.
going back to Disney. Like,
Totally. We're headed back,
forget it, man. Like, I mean, it's just easy, and you understand that. But, I think what you say about this ability, I think that is the crux of like following Jesus, is that there is this ability for that, wound to scab to
Yeah.
scar, that is always a reminder of that, but yet the pain is removed from it,
Yeah.
in that sense.
Totally.
So you talk about healthy churches,
Yeah.
and we always kind of like give this sort of disclaimer. Anytime that a church, claims to be healthy or claims, values or
Sure,
distinctives,
sure.
we call them distinctives. I always tell people, like, this is a statement of us when we are at our best.
Yeah.
We're not always at our best.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
for sure.
Yeah, and it's like, because I think there's this sense we go like, well, here's what a healthy church like, and it's like when we're at our best, this is how we are.
Sure.
But we also understand we're not always at our best. Sometimes we just, it's what you said, your pastor, like, I should have said that, Yeah. So
Exactly.
as you think about it, what are some things that you would, if you had a young leader saying, hey, I want to develop or be a part of a healthy church, what are some of the key components that you would say, look for this?
Oh man, forgiveness would
Yeah.
be like the number one thing. I tell this to any person who's even going into ministry. If you don't know how to forgive, you're never going to make it because everyone's going to hurt your feelings. And it's people being people inside the walls of a church. People hurt your feelings when you go into Target. People hurt your feelings at the DMV. But at first, like in church, it just feels so
Right.
below the belt because it's like,
There's a spiritual attachment
yeah.
to it.
because it's like
Yeah.
you walk in and you expect to see the
Yeah.
face of Jesus in every
Yeah.
person that you meet.
Anytime you add spirituality to that, it magnifies
Oh, yeah.
in any abuse, in any, poor leader. We see poor leaders all over the corporate world,
For
like
sure.
doing some of the same things that we see with the church. And I'm not saying it's equal because I don't think it is. There's a higher standard.
Yeah,
But when you
totally.
add a spiritual leader component to it,
Yeah,
it's like it becomes so deeply
it
offensive.
changes
And
everything.
yeah,
And it changes your whole perspective on
yeah.
life. So just learning how to forgive people has been like when we'd grow up and do those mission trips, we would have like so many like fights on the mission trip just between people because it's like all these people going to a third world country
Right,
just like in the
right.
middle of
Tired,
nowhere. Yeah.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
All that. So
A
it's
war
like,
going on.
of course, everything that could come
A
against this
war
one.
is going on.
And our guy who was the leader, he was so sweet. His name was Ed, and he would have us say this mantra every morning. He's like, Rhino hide, heart of a dove. I put purpose in my heart to walk in love because
Love
I'm
it.
a love creature.
Mm,
And it was like, okay, how can we keep in ministry rhino hide to where nothing really affects us, but we keep like the sensitivity of
right.
like heart of the dove to be
Yeah.
able to like Holy Spirit to be able to speak to us. And I always ask my pastors this because I'm like, when people like leave a church and they pour
Yeah.
so much into people, I'm like, are you guys okay?
Yeah.
I'm like,
So good. So
and
good.
someone leaves our staff or something, I'm like, and they're like, no,
Right.
this is like,
Yeah.
this is it. This is
It's
like,
open-handed. Yeah.
and they've just learned to live that way. And I think that's something that's huge.
Yeah.
Celebrating unity of
Yeah.
like
Unity.
a culture of just no offense, that it
Yeah.
doesn't sit. And it's challenging. It's
Yeah.
really
For
hard
sure.
that way. It's so much easier to like harbor things sometimes. We had Todd and Julie Mullins, who are like
Hmm.
amazing
Yeah.
pastors in Florida. They came and were speaking to our staff, and they're like, conflict doesn't kill a team. They're like, unresolved conflict kills a
Yes,
team.
that's true.
Because that's what you're saying.
So
It's
good.
like we're all going to have things that happen. It's like there's going to be offense. That's
Right.
so natural. There's offense within your family.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
don't think that that's going to happen
For
like
sure.
with the people that you're doing ministry with.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just the way that you approach it afterwards. I mean, we go biblically of like go to that person first.
Yeah.
And then like if it's not working, then you bring in a leader. We don't like tolerate, talking amongst yourselves. Of like, I think that's what I was saying. I was at that church and I was like, hey, why are we? Because I just feel so protective over
Sure.
just ministry. Because I'm like,
Yeah.
I think you don't realize all the
Right.
time the impact that you might be
Right.
making
Right. Or
by
where
this,
this is going.
yeah, by that conversation that you're having.
Yeah.
Because what you do when you like vent to someone who can't do anything about it, you're just giving them a loaded gun.
Yeah. For sure.
You're just giving them poison that they don't have an antidote for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're the one that can actually, I remember reading the book Bait of Satan by
Yeah.
John
For
Bevere
sure.
when it was like, and I remember getting to secondhand offense, and he's like, this is the most toxic of all offense.
Mm.
And it was like, because they physically can't resolve it
Yeah. Nothing you
and
can
they
do.
can't play a part in it.
No.
So it's like
It's
complaining
so
up.
unkind.
Oh,
It's so unkind to complain to someone that can't do anything with it. And I
totally.
think that we look at those times and think, well, I feel better now, but I
Yeah.
have just been so cruel to that
Yeah,
person.
you just threw up on them.
Yes,
And they're like,
and walked away.
and then now when they see
Right.
that person,
Their
they're
whole
like,
perspective has changed.
I can't believe they're getting away with that.
Right.
And
Right.
they don't even know
If it's real or perceived, or
yeah,
you
the
don't know what's really.
conversations
Yeah.
that have been had. And I say that from a place of being so guilty of it.
Sure.
Because it is that thing of like, it's like purging yourself. You're like, oh, thank God I feel so relieved.
Yeah.
And that person's
Yeah.
like,
Thanks for that.
yeah. I mean, I've even had to like learn that in marriage.
For
Of
sure.
like, because that's like your person. And it's like, I just want to say every possible thing on my mind. And
Yeah.
it's like, man, that's not always setting you up to win
Yeah.
because you weren't
Yeah.
in that conversation
Right. For
and
sure.
you weren't in that meeting.
Yeah.
And so it's just definitely a learning curve
Yeah.
of like one of the biggest things I would say that like I've just seen ministries get taken out for it
Yeah.
for just conversation that went the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And then like
Unresolved.
then you start our pastor, we had our serve team conference over this weekend and we were kind of talking about this and he was like you'll start to see you have these conversations and then you'll get to church and be like, why do we have all these cameras? Why do we spend money
Right.
on like you
Right.
just it switches
Right.
like over small conversations with a person that
Right.
you're pouring coffee with
Yep.
to like now you're sitting and like, why
Mhm.
do we do that? You know what I mean? And then you're questioning everything. And then you just see your heart get darkened over something that's like,
Yeah.
oh, that was so minute.
Right.
And then I would say like community is
Yeah.
so massive. Like I have just seen a community help just save people's lives.
Yeah.
Like it really is. Even we're fortunate to have a church of a lot of people, but it's made small because we have so many groups and things like that. And
Mhm.
even like I lead a group, my husband leads a group.
Yeah.
Like those are the things that we like we're not above it because
Right. Right.
we have fuller
We're part of
lives.
it. Yeah.
I mean, there's certain seasons, like I normally have a basketball group. Right now I've had I'm not great at basketball. Okay, I want to start
That's
by
awesome.
saying that I wanted to
It's an
learn how to play
aspirational group.
basketball. And
That's
the
awesome.
only other
I
basketball
love
group
it.
was Pastor Earl's. And he was
Yeah.
like, we're not doing girls in this group. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start a co-ed
I'll start my own group.
So
I don't need your group.
I know. So now some of the leaders are running with it for this fall
So
season.
good.
But it's just like those kinds of things of
Mhm.
just being in community with people and like laughing a lot with
Right.
people and not taking it too seriously. Like I think that what we do is so serious,
Yeah.
but it doesn't always have to look like white knuckling everything all the time.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
no, like I my sister used to travel with me a bunch and she just had her own journey with the Lord. And I remember one time she told me, she was like, I don't know. I don't know if I really am like into all this anymore because there's not like a Christian that I'd want their life.
Mm.
And I was like,
Wow.
huh. Like it made
That's
me,
probably a problem.
yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, it really made me think of like, we should be the ones that are
Yeah.
like
Right.
so happy, full of life, bright eyes. We're
Yeah.
not detached from reality, but we have
Yeah.
a greater hope and a knowledge of who the Lord
Yeah.
is. So it
Yeah.
should like make us, even in a recession, feel like
Yeah.
life giving and those
Right.
kinds of things. And I think that sometimes in ministry, we feel like we have to be like, I'm carrying my cross.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, yes, we are. But it's like we get to be living a life that is an example of like fruit,
Yeah.
like
So good.
love, joy,
We
So
should
good.
look
peace,
like
patience.
Goshen
Yeah.
in all that's happening
Oh
Yeah.
my
around.
gosh. There should be a difference of like, why?
It's funny. We have a friend, Nancy Houston, who's a counselor and that sort. And I read the statement she made on Instagram, which is where I get all my inspiration.
Sure.
And,
He's like, all my theology.
all my theology, all of
Uh-huh.
all my answers. But she said the answer to a harsh world or harsh life, harsh world is play. And it really
Mm.
struck me because I thought, just exactly what you're saying. I think sometimes in the church world, I know I do. I get so overwhelmed with the seriousness of
Sure.
every message and meeting and, decision. And before long, I look at my life, I'm like, who wants this? Like, this is just stress all the time.
24/7
You know what I mean?
stress.
And
Yeah.
again, so how do you interact with your kids when you're 24/7 stressed? How do you
Yeah.
interact with your neighbors when you're stressed out all the time? You don't have time for it because
Yeah.
you're like, I just gotta, and I understand there are times that are stressful. But I just thought and we actually started this conversation. I was like, we gotta play more. We just gotta
Yeah.
go play. We
Yeah.
just gotta go do things that, yes, major decisions and things are happening and the world is the world. But
Sure.
we're just gonna
That we
go.
make better decisions
Absolutely. We're gonna go have some fun. We're gonna
about
go.
those big
Yeah.
decisions
Yeah.
when we're not
We're gonna get around some people. We're gonna eat some
carrying
good food,
so much.
laugh, and all of
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
We're gonna
totally.
play so that, and often I find coming back to those stressful situations, you're just less stressed because you're like, okay, we
Yeah.
have a perspective. Like, this is not everything. And I think sometimes you can get so overwhelmed with like, I'm gonna make the wrong decision. I'm gonna do the wrong thing,
Totally.
and my whole
I'm not
life's gonna go
spiritual
off.
enough. This
Right.
is not like
It really puts the focus
So
on
good.
us instead of God.
yeah.
When we can play, it truly is a statement
Right.
of our trust in God.
Like, let's
When
just go have
when
fun.
we can't play,
Yeah.
it's putting us
I think
in
there's
God's place.
Totally.
there's that pendulum swing of like to irresponsibility. And that's not what we're saying. We're just saying
Sure.
you can remain responsible and just have a lot of joy, have a lot of fun
Yeah.
by playing in the midst of it, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
So good.
That's so great. I started a podcast this year, which is like, what am I doing? I don't know.
Right. Because there's not enough podcasts out there. That's our
yeah,
that's our
there's not
position.
there's needs
We
to be
started
another
this whole thing
conversation
because like
in
there's
the
nobody
mix.
talking on
I'm
cameras.
just another shout in the void, if you will. But all that is to say, we started this, and I was like, I didn't necessarily want to start a podcast. I was like, I love talking. I'll just like
Sure.
talk till I'm blue in
Sure.
the face. But I really felt the Lord put it on my heart because in our space, and so many of my friends that are girls, they're like, yeah, we love like conversation podcasts, but they're like, sometimes they're just like,
Right.
was not edifying, and it's like the girls, it's like a lot
Yeah.
of girls podcasts who talk about a lot of just like fun, like pop culture stuff, but then like at the end of it they're like, oh, did that really like
Right.
move the needle
Right.
forward for me at all?
Was that worth my time?
Yeah. And so we started this podcast. It's basically like way more fun,
Yeah.
and just we talk about things of God. And like I think of our podcast the other day, we were just like catching up, having a blast, like laughing till we're crying. And then at the end, we talked about like holiness and Samson and all the things.
Right.
And I was like, I really think that the balance is
So
supposed to
important.
yeah, like it's supposed to be like that. Like I would be like, oh, maybe our podcast isn't spiritual enough. Like maybe we're laughing too much. Like people
Yes.
listen to my record and then they're gonna want to think that I'm just like preaching every week. And I'm
Right.
like, no, that's not me.
No.
Like I
No.
genuinely think that that's because what we do is really heavy
Yeah.
and it is hard and we get to sit with people in their darkest moments, but we also get to be with people in their highlights.
Yeah, for
Of
sure.
like, I mean, you're a pastor and you'll be at a funeral one day and a wedding at another,
Yeah.
and it's the juxtaposition of what that looks like, and just being able to have that dance of like,
Yeah.
my husband was talking this morning. He was like, we live in Texas, so I was like, let's go to the state fair this week.
Yeah. That's a big deal
Yeah.
in
Are you
Dallas.
kidding me? We're like,
We happened to be there one time, and it was they were like, "Oh, you need to go to the fair," and I'm like, "I don't think I do."
yeah,
but, you
you're
know,
like,
I don't even own
know.
a cowboy hat. What are you talking about? And so,
I mean, it can be a little ghetto in some spots, but we were just talking about that, and we just try to make space for like
yeah,
having those moments
just go have fun.
because it is so
So
important,
important.
and it
Yeah.
makes you better. Like what you're saying, there's this lie of like the busier you are, the
Right.
better you
Sure.
are,
Sure.
and we've kind of like made busy or like serious like an idol of like, oh, don't have time for it, don't have time for it, and it's
They say
like,
busy is a 4-letter word.
oh yeah,
Like we just
it's just like,
we
oh
just don't.
man, this is, and it's like Jesus wasn't busy. He was a full life, but he wasn't busy.
Never ran anywhere.
And it was like, and anyone who stopped him, he stopped.
He was super interruptible.
Can you imagine if he was like, I mean, literally, the disciples were like,
Half your
no
Bible,
time for this.
half your New
Like,
Testament, you
get
wouldn't
these
have it.
kids out of here.
Yeah.
Who is this? You don't have
Exactly
time
right.
to talk. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna stop and just to be that what you're saying, interruptible, and like having that.
I think that's so key. It's like we always talk about busy as a statement of priorities. You
Mhm.
know, and when people go, "Oh, Pastor, I know you're busy," I'm like, I'm not busy. My life is full,
Mhm.
but it's full of the things that I put a priority on.
Yeah.
And that's where we just haven't put the priority on play or rest or community.
Mhm.
You know, we put priorities on the things that we think are going to move the needle
Sure.
in terms of ministry success, growing a church, growing a ministry, whatever that is, instead of going like, no, my priority is to go play right now and have a
Yeah.
great time at the Texas Fair. You know, that's
Yeah, exactly. See us at the state fair.
See us at the state fair. That's awesome.
with a huge corn dog.
Oh yeah, the corn dogs. That's a huge thing for the fair.
What is your food of choice
Yeah.
at the state fair? That's what I want to know.
Oh my gosh, probably honestly a turkey leg. I know that sounds so intense.
Seriously, our
But you can
daughter-in-law is the
stay
same
on-
way.
You can
Our
stay in
daughter-in-law
ketosis when you
loves-
eat a turkey
You
leg.
can.
Yeah.
You can.
No,
Heck yeah.
no, yeah, we're gonna
Give
try
yourself
everything.
the meat sweats.
They,
yeah.
no,
like-
for sure. You're like, why do I feel crazy right now?
I have a drumstick of
No,
a turkey.
literally.
I'm eating. No, actually, our daughter-in-law is the same way. We always joke about it because we go to the wherever we're going, the amusement parks. We're like,
Usually at Disney,
Yeah.
Taylor's always like, Erica,
you want a turkey
Yeah.
leg?
want a turkey leg?
Yeah.
I'm like, that was one of her most endearing things, I
Yeah.
think, is that
I'm like,
she.
how crazy is it that we're eating a full turkey leg?
Yeah.
Like, we're just
Okay.
like,
And proudly walking
I know, just
around,
walking around, just
like
eating it.
Just holding
manhandling
it.
Oh,
this.
totally. Well, at the state fair, they do
a
like a
scepter.
competition of like fried food. So every year they
Oh,
just
wow.
fry anything.
So fried Twinkies.
fried Twinkies, Oreos, fried butter. There's
I've heard that. Like, I can't understand that. My
fried
mind just doesn't get
gravy,
it.
Fried,
Fried
there's like
gravy.
they fried everything. I
That's
don't know
crazy.
what's gonna win this year. Bacon, fried cotton candy. I'm
Yeah.
like, what are we doing? You know what I mean?
Fried butter, though, is a bit of an enigma to me. I'm just like, how does
I
one.
That's
know.
like
That
a lot of
Ice cream,
cholesterol.
I
There's
know
fried
that
ice
just
cream.
sounds just like your whole
Like a
face
heart
is breaking
attack.
out.
Yes.
Like the next day you're full of breakouts.
So when we say healthy, we're not talking about diets.
Yeah.
We're talking about community
yeah,
and
get your group to the state
relationship.
fair.
Yeah.
There you go.
And then you
Oh.
can all stay in ketosis for sure, man. That's so hardcore. Turkey leg.
Oh,
That's awesome.
so fun.
Awesome. Well, it's been
This
good.
is fun.
Yeah.
This is so fun. Thank you guys for having me. It was such
It's
a
been good time.
blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we enjoy it. Thank you. And we will put your podcast because
To the golden nugget.
yeah, the golden, which I love that. By the way, I told the church before you came, I was like, when I was announcing who was doing what, and I was like, the name Golden is pretty epic, like in terms of just all things,
It's pretty cool. It's like my given name. People think it's often like a stage name.
right? Like you've created this,
All those things.
but it is really your name. Like that's a name you can work with.
Yeah.
the
You
Golden
go-
Nugget.
Yeah, lots of puns off that name.
Yeah.
All the things.
For
but
sure. So we'll make sure to put those in the notes and
Thank you.
love the comments. We'll direct people that way. And obviously your ministry, we love it. It's so
Oh, so
powerful and
kind.
just
Thank
pray
you.
that, man, God just continues to open the doors for you.
Man,
we're excited to see what
receive
God's doing in
that.
your
Thank
life.
you.
in your church
So
and your new
honored to be
marriage
here. Oh yeah, the
with Enoch.
best.
And so what a fun season that you're in. And
Truly.
so we just are excited. So thanks for joining us, being a part, and you can like and share and go to the Golden Nugget. It'll be a great time, be a lot of fun. So
Lots of laughs.
some people think that's like a casino in Las
I
Vegas. It's
know.
actually a
Go
podcast.
hit it big at the Golden Nugget.
Oh man, all day long. So, but thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.